have set fire to the synagogue, or at least that those who did it acted under my orders, so that there would be no place where Christ is rejected. Moreover, the synagogue was in fact destroyed by the judgment of God. Now, when Augustine, I'll just finish that bit, when Augustine went to Ambrose, he went to a service that Ambrose did, and Ambrose built the most fabulous treatise, really, a sort of argument for philosophy and for man's answer to the world's and the meaning of the world. And then he beautifully demolished it. And Augustine was kind of open-mouthed. He was so impressed. He became a believer in Jesus. So on the one hand, this chappie was won to Jesus, but on the other hand, he's spewing out terrible hatred against Jewish people. And that's Ambrose of Milan and Augustine of Hippo. So as it went on, it became a criminal offense to convert to Judaism, and more laws and anti-Semitic thought were coming against the Jewish people. A law requiring them to wear a distinguishing mark on their clothing. I believe at first it was more like a yellow circle. It could be stripes at one point, I think, but yellow. It seems to be yellow. I don't know why. And of course, this was adopted later by the Nuremberg laws, adopted it by the Nazis in 1935, and they had a yellow star. And in Britain, you had these blood libels. I don't know if you know about this, but William of Norwich was a young boy, and he was found tortured and murdered and buried in a field. And the Jews were blamed. Same with little Hugh of Lincoln. And so because it was said that the Jews had done this because they wanted to collect the blood of these children to use making their matzahs for Passover and for... I mean, it's just crazy things. And so the violent attacks began against the Jews. So the people, the mob, rose up to attack them. And you must probably know about Clifford's Tower in York, where 150 Jews committed suicide altogether, rather than be at the mercy. And I have to say, that reminds me of the father of a little girl who has red hair, who actually came out of Gaza. But when he realized that they had her somehow, he thought that she was dead. And he said at that time that he was glad, rather than be taken to Gaza and be treated the way that they were in Gaza. And of course, when it turned out she was still alive, he was just over the moon, and But so in 1290, the expulsion of Jews from Britain was decreed by an act of the king. What is, sorry? Yes, I'm sorry. Right, thank you for that. I will change it. Yeah, that's very important. I mean, the Synod of Oxford in 1222 came out with all kinds of laws, extra taxes, they can't marry, but it wasn't so in Scotland. Yes. Yeah. Right, okay. Well, we'll talk about that. You can tell me more. So in 1492, of course, they were expelled from Spain, and often it was because of money. They weren't able to work, certain jobs were not theirs, but they were earning money, and they were lending it to kings and queens. And then, of course, when it came to handing it back, they hadn't the money to give it back, and it was easier to expel them back of Spain. But portrayed in literature, I mean, we've read Shakespeare, we've read Oliver Dickens, haven't we, Charles Dickens, and probably, I don't know whether it occurred to us or thought about it, but here you've got them portrayed in literature, a caricature, perceived, and they're always kind of money-grabbing, so it's a terrible figure that they paint. So anti-Semitic acts certainly in London, but I think this is across the country. I don't know whether this now extends, I think it will, into Scotland as well. But it's risen. It rose in 1 year. It rose by 1,014 incidents. And you can see abusive behavior, threats, damage, desecration, assault, extreme violence, and literature. A lot of writing about them. So it's increasing. And lots of things were cancelled, lots of writings everywhere. But this is awful. I mean, a Russian-Israeli artist anti-Putin show, objecting to her posts mourning October 7th. She was mourning a massacre. And for this, she was told she couldn't have her exhibition. And we as CMJ, I've been told from at least 3, if not 4 churches, when I've suggested perhaps a meeting, I've been told, oh, well, we like CMJ, but we don't think that given the circumstances, over there, that we can have you at the moment. And perhaps when it's all calmed down, you can come. And I said, but we're about evangelizing Jewish people. We want them to come to believe in Jesus. Oh, yes, I know. But just while it's like that, there are some in the church that wouldn't like it. And you think, wow. So they're the people we'd like to discuss it with, really. So that's Christian anti-Semitism. It's still going on. Islamic anti-Semitism. Now, Muhammad. So he comes along quite a few centuries after Jesus, and he lives with Jewish people. He lives with Christians, and then his book is written, the Quran. And if you read it, it contains a lot of Jewish things from the Bible, a lot of Christian bits, but it's very muddled up, and things are changed, and it doesn't flow if you've read it at all. And there's a lot of hatred. Most of it is ranting and raving against about things. But on the other hand, he was sort of quite friendly at first, and then he thought, but not many people are turning to my new religion. And I believe that he made Islam, so he wanted a religion for the desert dwellers, because the Jewish people had Judaism, the Christians had Jesus, and he wanted something for the desert dwellers. And so he had Islam. But people were not very keen to convert to Islam. And he was then tried to convert Jewish people to Islam, and that didn't go down very well at all. So he went to Medina, and he tried to, he preached to the Jewish people. They weren't having it, and so he massacred them all. It's kind of like convert or die. We've heard that before, haven't we? And dimitude. So where there was kind of peace with Jews and Christians, you would have a 2-level people. So you would have servants, really. You'd have the dhimmis. And the dhimmis, walking along the street, would have to get out of the way for the Muslims to walk along. And second-class citizenship, they would have to pay more taxes and things like this. And, of course, there was a lot of aggression against the Jewish people. Now, not all Muslims are like that. But that is the creed, and that is what the Quran has within it. And from Gaza into Israel, constantly, before October 7th, we had rockets all the time being fired into Israel. And Israel, they would go in and try and sort it out, or they would do a little thing, but nothing big. And they just put up with this for years and years and years. And the same in the north. Hezbollah were sending rockets from the north. And then came October the 7th. So they're just firing rockets there, and it's just constant. And suicide bombers, you know about all that, don't you? The intifadas and so on. I don't know if you can actually see that, but that's the number of rockets fired at Israel from the Gaza Strip by year up to 2021. So you'll see that there are a couple of really large years and then lesser ones. But the maximum is 4,225 one year. But since October 7th, there have been 19,000 rockets sent from Gaza into Israel, just from Gaza. And I don't know, we might say we don't know where they get them from, but we do. We do know where, and we do know what paid for it. So then October 7th came, and that's a house, and those are some cars at the bottom. And the damage that was done was incredible, and the mutilations and the methods of killing people and everything they did was just inhuman. And not only were 1,200 slaughtered, but there were about 4,000 injured, something like that, or approaching that. So a huge number of people. And then, just for a moment on October 7th, the world paused and the world felt sorry for Israel. But then the day after that, we have stopped the genocide in Gaza. We have all the desecration continuing, and everybody rises up and blames Israel. Must be their fault. Must be their fault. They must deserve it. Look at theirs. And it just became a thing, and everybody's jumping on this bandwagon from the river to the sea. And it's been shown, hasn't it, that some people chanting this hadn't a clue what river and what sea. They were just doing it for the next thing. Look at the marches. And here, this pro-Palestinian march is in the 33rd week. That was a couple of weeks ago, so it must be the 35th week now if they're still doing it. And that's according to the Islamic News Agency. And they're all across Europe. You can see them in all countries. And it was a bit frightening at first. Well, unless it made you cross, in which case you shouted back, have you ever been to it? Have you ever been to Gaza? You should go. And there's Israel's population. The Arabs would say that they have go back generations and generations, that the land was theirs because they're Palestinians. Do we all know where the name Palestine came from? Yes, the Romans called it that as an insult to the Jewish people. When the Bar Kokhba revolt, when they renamed Jerusalem, Aelia Capitolina, and the land Palestina in Greater Syria. And then Palestina stuck, sadly. It would have been a lot better if it had been changed, wouldn't it? And of course, Yasser Arafat coined it all into having a people called Palestinians, and so it became a thing. But look at the number of Jews and the number of Arabs. The percentage is amazingly different. And Martin Luther King, you declare, my friend, that you don't hate the Jews. You're just anti-Zionist, because that's what people will say. Oh, I've nothing against the Jewish people. I just don't think they should be in land of Israel, in Palestine, you know. So we're anti-Zionist. But he says, let the truth ring forth from the high mountaintops. Let it echo through the valleys of God's green earth. When people criticize Zionism, they mean Jews. This is God's own truth. All men of good will exult in the fulfillment of God's promise that his people should return in joy to rebuild their plundered land. This is Zionism, nothing more, nothing less. And he figures again in a moment. So that's Islamic anti-Semitism. But there is a good news story, as Aaron would say. And we know that in Isaiah 19, it talks about a highway. In that day, says God, there will be a highway from Egypt, my people, Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. And there'll be travel up and down this highway, and the people will dwell together. And we know many people who have been working this highway as evangelists, as engagers, and they've brought many to Jesus. And they have a conference at Christ Church in the old city of Jerusalem, CMJ Centre, every couple of years, called At the Crossroads Conference, not to be confused with At the Checkpoint Conference in Bethlehem. This is At the Crossroads. And it's the crossroads of the Middle East. And ex-Muslims come from all the countries around, all of them. And they manage to get in, and they meet with the Jewish believers in Jesus, and they just love each other. They're just thrilled. I know many Iranians in Great Britain who love Jesus, and they just can't wait to go to Israel. Some do. And they can't wait to mix with their Jewish fellows and their family together. So there is good news, and it's Jesus. The good news is the Messiah, Jesus. So here we have critical race theory, and the answer for this is exactly the same. It's Jesus. So in America, really, it started in America for Americans, and it was saying, even though you think you've sorted racism, you haven't really. It's endemic. It's in the laws, it's in the land, it's in the water, as it were. That's what they're saying. And they had separate places. So, back to Martin Luther King, saying that let's not look at race, let's put that behind us. Let's say that we're moving on because it's character that matters, not colour. And, we all would say, absolutely, amen, we totally agree. But the trouble is, those who believe in critical race theory, because they think it's not dealt with, they want to do the opposite. They want people to see race, and they want to point it out, and they want everyone to apologize and grovel and say they're so sorry that they ever, whatever, And I think that's interesting, because I was in a car park during the height of all this bending the knee to, what is it? Yeah. So, and I was in this car park. I'd gone to a service station on the motorway, and a car drew up next to me, and there's a car full of Indian people. And normally, I wouldn't even bat an eyelid. I'd just get out of the car, go get my drink. Yeah, I've noticed that they're an Indian family next to me, so what? I'd go and get my drink. I'd come back, get in the car. On this occasion, because of all this propaganda and all this brainwashing, I kind of almost got out of the car and went, oh, welcome to Britain. You're Indian. You know, they've probably been there all their lives. But that didn't matter because they are just drawing attention to something that we've moved on from. And you can't, you just have. So because what it's all about is you have two groups of people. You have the oppressed and the oppressors. So the oppressed are the blacks. The oppressors must be the whites. The colonialists are the oppressors. The anti-colonialization group are the oppressed. The poor, the oppressed, the rich, the women, the men, gay and lesbians, heterosexuals, the trans in sports, everybody else. Muslims, Jewish people, white, successful, rich. The Muslims, or at least the critical race theorists, or I would say the woke brigade, put the Jewish people in the white category. Well, I mean, Jewish people come from every country in the world. You've got Ethiopians, you've got Chinese, Jews. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. But that's what they've decided. Because they're rich and successful, they must be colonialists, and et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, the land doesn't belong to them. It really belongs to the Muslims, to the Palestinians. And you've got Glasgow and Edinburgh. Or you might be Edinburgh and Glasgow as to who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor. But you get the point. Now, it's wokeism. I have a granddaughter who every time lives in London. I think they drink it in the London water. Because every time, she was about 15 at the time, every time she came through my door, she'd have two guns blazing like a world western, movie, and she'd go, "So, Grandma, you don't like gays, huh?" And I'd go, "What do you mean I don't like it?" And then "So, Grandma, you don't think Black Lives Matter," and she'd just go through every single, "So, Grandma, you don't agree with climate change." Now, every single latest movement, she'd come through and challenge me. And at first I used to and now I just go, oh. She couldn't see the difference between a person and the behavior. For her, it was all one, and I think that's wokeism. But anyway, God says of his people, they will live in their own land. The days are coming when people will no longer say, "As surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites out of Egypt," but they will say, "As surely as the Lord lives, who brought the descendants of Israel up out of the land of the north, out of all the countries where he had banished them, and they will live in their own country, their own land." The restored remnant, it will happen on that day that the Lord will again recover his hand a second time. I love this passage in Isaiah 11, because when they came from Iraq and everything, from Babylon, they came from the east. This time, they'll come from everywhere, from all the islands, east, west, north, south. And he will assemble the banished ones of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So that's the second gathering. And don't forget, he said the desert will blossom when the land comes back. Mark Twain said it's like a desolate land that's asleep. But we know that she was waiting for her prince to come and kiss her into life. And that's Jesus, and also the Jewish people. God's promise went back, and the land began to bloom and blossom. "Do not be afraid, I am with you. I will bring your children from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth, everybody who is called by my name, who I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." And he did. They began to go back at the end of the 19th century, particularly. There have always been Jews in the land, but particularly then, when it came to the land of the state of Israel being reborn, could it be done in a day? It was done in a day, Isaiah 66, and they're still coming back in hordes. Don't think they're all white, do you? I think they're the rainbow nation that Martin Luther King talked about, and that we are, the church, is a proud rainbow nation too. And look at that lot. That's 100,000 Jewish people at the wall at the beginning. Hang on, that was the Feast of Trumpets, Aaron, or was that the day before? See you again. God bless you. So, they're not going anywhere. They're staying in their land. And God has a purpose for his people. So even though there's all this secular marxism, wokeism, critical race theory, whatever you want to call it, God is on his throne. And this is another empire that will fall at his feet.